Are you a Face Off fan? Are you a fan of Face Off?
Yes, I love Face Off.
Yeah.
Like unironically, yeah, I kind of like Face. I really like Face Off.
Unironically, I like the part where he says "face on."
No, I thought you were gonna go. I want to take his face off.
No, but the part where he says "face on," I was like, I agree. Unironically, I agree.
I think it's just so funny because like you would think his wife would be able to know a different guy underneath the face.
I know, but that's
totally different body down there.
That's the bigger part that's troubling about the movie. They should have found guys with at least similar builds.
Right, because like Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, I think are like several inches like different in height too.
And width.
Yeah. Girth.
Yeah, girth. Like John Travolta's a girthy boy, you know? And like, you know, Nick Cage is like pretty wiry.
Yeah.
Especially in the 90s. Yeah, they really, and they also don't really act like each other
At all. They just kind of do their own shtick.
Yeah. Like they don't like imitate one another really. They don't.
Yeah.
It's not like John Travolta like playing a kind of Nick Cage character. That is kind of the way the movie's advertised too, and he doesn't really
do that at all.
Also, especially because Nick Cage is so weird. Like Nick Cage is like the Al Pacino of Al Pacinoing Al Pacino, you know?
Yeah.
Just screaming. Like that part at the beginning where the church and he's like doing that weird dance.
Oh my God.
Like at no point does John Travolta's performance like reach that level of like chaotic.
Yeah, because then he's just
Even when he's like
obsessed with crime, I guess.
He's obsessed with crime.
He's-
The best villains in movies are obsessed with crime. They just want to commit as many as they can.
Some men don't want anything logical.
Yeah, they just want to see the world burn. We're talking to you about Hard Boiled today from 1992. I'm Griffin.
I'm Ryan. Welcome back. Like he said, Hard Boiled 1992.
John Woo, baby.
Yes, Hard Boiled is a 1992 Hong Kong action movie directed by John Woo with screenplay done by Gordan Chan and Barry Wong. Gordan Chan, for those of you who may not know, is also famous for directing KOF 2010 or the live action King of Fighters movie. I don't know if we got any King of Fighters fans.
A movie that probably didn't need to exist, but does.
A movie that probably should have never been made.
Yeah, probably should have never made it.
But the original story was also by John Woo. So, you know, essentially this is just John Woo's baby. Like literal.
Well, and according
John Woo's literal baby.
If the internet's to be trusted, they were changing the script up until like a week before filming.
Right. So how much of it was original that stayed, or how much original stuff
Yeah.
stayed till the final
how much
product?
Right. And then you said before we were filming, we were talking about this, and you mentioned that one of the writers died, right?
Yeah, I think Barry Wong was the one who passed away during the writing of the original script, and that's why they had Gordan Chan come on in order to finish some other stuff. Barry Wong was in charge of writing a lot of Tony Leung's character arc throughout the entire movie, and I don't think he got to finish that.
Okay.
But you know, the movie got finished anyways.
Yeah. And it's really good.
I really like it.
I really like it too.
How familiar would you say you are with, you know, Hard Boiled, John Woo?
I love this movie. I've seen it many times. It's like one of my like favorite things to just like put on. I love the music in particular. Michael Gibbs, who did the score for this one, really just like sells like the early 90s action movie kind of vibe in such a, yeah, it's just iconic for me. Also, every time I listen to it, I end up, or see the movie, I end up like playing the music over and over again in my head for like at least 3 days afterwards. But yeah, I like it very much. One YouTube commenter called it a bullet ballet bloodbath, which I think is probably about as
alliteration.
Yeah, but it's an appropriate.
That's a pretty appropriate summation.
Yeah, it's an appropriate moniker for a film such as this.
How familiar would you say you are with John Woo?
John Woo's other work? Okay, I haven't watched that many of his Hong Kong movies. This one was the one that I used to always kind of go back to. But of course, I've seen, you know, Face Off. And
Let's go, Face Off.
Yeah, I've seen Mission Impossible 2, of course. I
right.
think. But yeah, I actually need to go back. I need to dig around deeper into his Hong Kong oeuvre, because I think in general everybody thinks that's better than the stuff he did in Hollywood anyway. So I should probably.
I'm actually surprised you haven't watched a lot of John Woo's stuff, because John Woo tends to do more. Because you like Yakuza movies.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah,
John Woo makes triad movies.
Right, it's true. Well, and to be fair, like I've watched a lot of Johnny To movies.
Right.
I've watched other Hong Kong like triad kind of movies. But here's the thing: when you find one thing you really like, sometimes you end up going back to that one thing instead of investigating naturally all the things that are around it.
Would you say
which I think I probably should have.
So John Woo kind of, I wouldn't say he coined, but like the terminology is kind of associated with him very heavily. The heroic bloodshed genre. Would you say you're like a fan of that?
Yeah, I think they're cool. But I will say that in general, like actually the Hong Kong action movies that I are closest, nearest, and dearest to my heart are actually the action comedies of Jackie Chan's.
Okay.
Like, catalog. I really like Twin Dragons is probably like my favorite of all time, which is one that not a lot of people I think really like, but that one's like very much a comedy. And then, movies like Police Story and stuff like that very much like walk the line between being kind of like a very dramatic action movie and like being like very, very silly. And the heroic bloodshed movies are a lot more serious. And I think that like some people find I think the heroic bloodbath stuff may be easier to get into from a Western sensibility because the silliness, the frank silliness of like movies, like City Hunter and stuff like that, I think is harder for some Western audiences.
I think it's partially a disconnect in humor, and action is just much more of a universal language, maybe.
Right. Well, it's just I think like there's definitely like some like overly sentimental, overly kind of like there's the idea like in a Hong Kong movie, you can have very silly scenes and very serious scenes like kind of on top of one another. And like an American audience is like oftentimes very thrown off by that. I mean, I think that's one of like the main criticisms of Jar Jar Binks, right? Is that like Jar Jar Binks' shenanigans are like happening in the middle of Liam Neeson getting like cut in half or stabbed to death. You know what I mean?
Or the fact that he's the one that transfers over executive powers to the Chancellor.
Well, that was after the fact, though. People already hated him before he did that. People hated him for like 6 years before that happened.
Which essentially just solidifies the intergalactic civil war to continue for like another 5 years.
Or forever. I mean, they're still fighting those damn Star Wars.
There can never be enough. Well,
I'm so sick of these damn Star Wars.
What is it? It's history is an endless waltz of peace, conflict, or whatever.
And Star Wars.
And Star Wars.
I love the editing and like the coverage in these sequences. I really, really like. So the whole movie basically revolves around 3 action sequences. There's one in a tea house. There's one in like a creepy like gun warehouse, like somewhere like on the water, presumably.
Yeah, although it's like full of cars and other like I think it's just supposed to be like what is it called? It's
like a depot.
Yeah. Oh, God.
It's a smuggling depot.
That's what I was going to look for. I was looking for the term smuggling.
Yeah, it's a smuggling depot. And then there's a third part in a hospital.
And
so
honestly, like the hospital is where we stayed the longest throughout the entire.
It's pretty long actually. But the movie basically revolves around these hero cops, one of whom is like deeply undercover as like a triad, and they're trying to like bust up these gun smugglers in Hong Kong. And it's like it is kind of Hong Kong at like the height of its opulence. It's like it's beautiful. It's like gorgeous. It's like seedy, but it's also. And I think there's like one thing that's a kind of an interesting theme of the movie, and it ends up playing out through the visuals. Is that it's a very much like penthouse and pavement depiction of organized crime, where you see people in these lavish homes, but you also see the work they do in like the grimy spaces that work happens. You see that like the separation that they try to establish between like the nice things that this life provides for them and like the grimy places they have to do it.
Right.
But because of that, the movie's really, really beautiful because it's very, very seedy, like, street level Hong Kong shots. All the neon signs of Hong Kong are still, like it's Hong Kong as Hong Kong was, and it's like a time capsule of what Hong Kong was. I feel like
it's definitely Hong Kong where like people today, when they picture Hong Kong, that's like the image of Hong Kong. That
yes, exactly. But it doesn't look like that anymore.
It does not.
And this is a movie that like perfectly
it's like a time capsule movie.
It's a time capsule for sure.
Just like God, there was another film that we talked about not too long ago that was also a time capsule film.
Movies are all time capsules. First City. Movies are time capsules, and that's one of the best things about them. And this movie is an incredible time capsule of this time and place. And what really feels special with the movie in some ways actually is it seems to know. This movie has a sentimentality about its own time and place, which is an incredible ability to look at where you are and when you are and be like, this, people should see this.
Right. No, I don't disagree. And it's not just that, but like it's kind of like oozes that from every inch, from the way it's shot to the cars,
Yeah.
down to the style and
I
clothing.
love all those things.
Like Tony Leung's outfits
Yeah,
in this movie are
he's
absolutely like
he's such a fucking
iconic.
G. He's such a G. He does feel a little Don Johnson, but in a good way.
Look, absolutely. I think that's the whole point, though, because this movie, I think you brought this point up earlier that this feels so Michael Mann.
It's
Yeah,
very
this movie
Michael Mann.
it feels very Miami Vice.
It's very Miami Vice. He lives on a boat. He drives a red sports car around like a neon lit, like a beautiful sunset
got
drenched,
oversized sports coat going on.
Yeah, and he hangs out with these like people who dress really elegantly but are like total animals,
Right.
And that's Miami Vice, right?
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, it's like dressing up a pig, but it's beautiful, and the vibes are immaculate. And the music, I think, does sell that in a tremendous way.
You familiar with any other Chow Yun-fat movies?
Honestly, Chow Yun-fat, like, it's really funny because he's interesting in this movie. I don't find him as captivating as Tony Leung or even like the villain Anthony Wong, who I think was really, really great. Chow Yun-fat obviously was super famous in the 90s, because the late 90s, early 2000s for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and things like that. Right. But no, I don't feel like I know Chow Yun-fat as well as I know these other people in this movie.
I definitely like.
How do you feel about him?
I'd say I'd seen a lot of the movies that he's been in, just because I've also seen a lot of other John Woo movies, because he is a frequent collaborator, or was a frequent collaborator.
Right.
But definitely he went from a person that was like a gangster action movie star, and then slowly shifted into a comedic kind of actor, or like a romantic comedy kind of lead. It's almost
I like him in this role.
Yeah, no, definitely.
He feels very like, he feels taller than all the other actors, which
like,
gives him like a kind of like
he's kind of almost snarling.
Yeah.
Like,
but he's got like he has like an imposing kind of aura to him, but he's kind of got this
like
weird
that guy.
like, yeah, he's that guy.
He's that guy.
He's that guy. But he's also really kind of charming and funny too, in a weird way. And he's really there's this part where they're in an elevator and Tony Leung's kind of like trying to like make him feel insecure about his girlfriend.
Right.
He's like flirting with his girlfriend in front of him, and he doesn't give a fuck.
No. You know
what I mean? He's like, go ahead, flirt with my girlfriend. I don't care. And he's got, yeah. And it's not like he doesn't care about anything, because he spends like the first 20 minutes of the movie like moping because his friend, another cop, dies in the tea house shootout.
So in the opening scene of the movie, well, I guess it technically opens with Chow Yun-fat's character Tequila Yuen.
Yeah.
Playing jazz at a jazz club.
He plays jazz clarinet.
He plays jazz clarinet at a jazz club, and then after
he's
that,
mixing drinks. He's like mixing soda and tequila, I think, and he shakes them, and it bubbles up.
And then he like just downs it really quick. But that's such like it's such a strange scene to open up with, because I feel like you could just start at the tea house.
You could have,
that's the first major action set piece you get, and it's so tense.
Right.
Like, this movie from the beginning is super, super tense.
Right.
I feel like it's constantly cranking up the tension until like you get to the end of the like the major climax of the film.
Right.
And even then, it's still building up.
Well, and I like the way that they execute on that intensity. There's a lot of like slow pushes on people being shot, and then people's facial reactions to like watching people explode full of blood. Right. It doesn't shy away from any of the violence at any time.
You don't just see the entry wound, you'll see the exit wound and stuff like that, which I think is like super. It makes you feel more engrossed into the action of the film, which I think the film is trying to really get across, that like you're in a battlefield.
Yeah.
Like at a certain point, this just feels like a Call of Duty. Like,
but and then the movie does this great thing where like they'll be shooting each other and it'll like cut rapidly. So like the tea house is full of all these caged birds because they're smuggling guns in the bottom of their cages, and so it'll like rapidly cut to the birds like screaming in the middle of this gunfight, and it creates like an impressive level of tension. It's really, really high tension. And yes, it's like you said, I mean, like people are just writhing with like bullets coming out of them. And somebody on the internet, and this is why I love the internet. It's also how you know this is a good movie, because somebody bothered to count how many people die in this movie.
Of course.
And so I checked, and it said that the body count was 307 people.
I love the fact that there's an exact count on that.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy about it too is one cop dies at the beginning, so that means everyone else who dies at the beginning is a bystander.
Well, no, 2 cops die in the entire film.
Yeah.
The second cop is shot by Tony, if you recall, and then he starts freaking out about it in the elevator, and then Chow Yun-fat is like, You can't think about it. It wasn't a cop. You didn't see the badge. You're just hallucinating.
Yeah.
You just keep moving. There's
Yeah.
only right now, because if you start thinking about something else, we're gonna die.
Yeah, we're gonna die. Oh.
But the tea house.
Yeah.
Funny enough,
The tea house, by the way, is my actual favorite scene in the movie.
I love that action set piece from like start to finish.
Yes.
I feel like there's this whole like that in itself could have been expanded upon into its own kind of story going forward.
It's just that's the one that perfectly like has like the seedy vibes.
Mm-hmm.
The other two do feel a little bit like a soundstage.
Yeah, like the tea house, there's like sweat, there's grime,
Yeah.
it feels lived in.
And supposedly they demolished this tea house like 5 days after they shot this.
Golden,
Which is incredible.
It's a golden filming opportunity.
But that's I mean, when you're in it and the way they shot it really does feel like a real location.
Yeah.
The smuggling warehouse does feel a little bit like a soundstage.
That's the soundstage.
Yeah. But not in a bad way, just not as good.
Definitely more staged.
Yeah, and there's so many explosions, so many people getting shot. It's so much more chaotic. And on that level, it's really fun. Like he's like got this crazy shit where he's like swinging around from a rope from the ceiling, just like just like mowing people down. It's absolute chaos.
Like,
and it is
how
really.
are you not getting hit from up there?
Yeah, like what? No one can see you up there. And I guess he does have like the element of surprise or whatever, but it's like there's definitely some suspension of disbelief here.
And
I love that like all these people there's just motorcycles everywhere, so people are getting hit by motorcycles. People are shooting the motorcycles explode. It's a lot of wheelies. It's a lot to look at too. I will say before we move on from the tea house though, I want to talk about how one of my favorite actors there's this guy with like a Mac 10 who just like mows down people in the tea house, and he's a Japanese actor who is also in Ichi the Killer, which we talked about recently, named Jun Kunimura, and he's in so much stuff. It's actually
a lot of movies.
We're going to talk about so many movies that this guy is in.
This guy, he's going to show up in a lot of. He's not even just in Japanese films. He's in American films.
Yeah.
He's in Korean films.
Yeah.
Both, I think, mainland and Hong Kong films.
And he's still in stuff to this day. He was in Naked Director, which is pretty recent. But he's in Kill Bill. He's in Shin Godzilla. He's in Outrage, which we'll start talking about Takeshi Kitano.
I'm trying to remember what else he was in off the top.
He's in so much stuff.
He's in so much stuff, honestly. But it's so crazy that like he's just relegated to this dialogue-less role.
Yeah, that's true. In this one in particular, and it's I guess like if you look at it, he's in some other stuff. He was in Black Rain, so he was in like stuff back then.
Yeah.
Like Black Rain's like in the mid '80s, and is like Ridley Scott and everything like that. So. He's been around, he's been doing stuff, but he's still just, I don't know, he's got like the coldest face of like any actor ever. And he's just he's amazing. He's like pure cinema. I love that guy. And he has infinite bullets.
Like a Yakuza guy.
Yeah. That's why he's always so perfect in those roles. And there's a very memorable scene for Western film audiences. He's the guy who at the scene where Lucy Liu's character is like put at the top of the Yakuza in Kill Bill. He's like slamming on the ground, be like, this is horse shit.
It's like,
and he's so good in that scene.
We have an outsider like dictating rules of like
organization,
and then he gets his head cut off.
Yeah. But he's so good. He's like his level of disgust is so palatable. He's fantastic, and Tarantino's so good at picking out foreign actors.
I think it's just he watched a bunch of Hong Kong and Japanese cinema and just decided to just remember these guys.
I know, but even like just so many of the throwaway actors in somebody that just like the German guy who when he asked him what the medal's for and he says for bravery, like that guy's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Like I watch a lot of German movies. I've never seen that guy in anything. Like there's other, people who are in a bunch of stuff. Like, the guy who plays Dieter Hellstrom was in that Terrence Malick movie. Like there are other people who like, do other things, but like he's just great at picking out actors from other places. And I think that's a really cool skill to have. But yes, Jun Kunimura in this movie has infinite bullets. Every character in fact has infinite bullets. No one reloads. Maybe they pump the shotgun every once in a while as like a piece of choreography.
Right. I think there was one time where I saw Tony Leung and Chow Yun-fat like cock a gun, and that was like when they were in the basement of the hospital.
For me, I know this is probably really boring and no one would ever want to do this, but for me personally, the only way you can improve these kinds of sequences is if somebody's job on set was keeping track of how many bullets they used and choreographing reloading into the scenes. To me, it would just be sick. Maybe other people don't think it's cool. Maybe reloading is boring to other people.
Okay, so what you want is essentially just John Wick.
Do they do that in John Wick? I don't remember them doing that.
John Wick.
I've watched John Wick. He reloads in John Wick.
Yeah, no. Bullets, like the bullet count in a magazine is really, really important in the John Wick movies.
Okay.
Like there's a whole plot point in John Wick 2 where he only has a gun with I think 7 bullets or something like that.
And like every bullet is scripted, right?
No, he just immediately unloads the magazine on the first guy.
Okay.
Then steals their gun.
And then just takes their gun.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And like it builds you up to be like, oh my god, he's got 7 bullets. He has to use this, so it's gonna be Metal Gear Solid type.
Right.
No, he's just like first guy he sees is ba 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 ba.
Yeah.
Which
oh my god.
They don't care about that in Hard Boiled.
No.
Chow Yun-fat is Max Payne in like infinite bullet cheat.
The whole movie is infinite bullet cheats. And he's got 2 guns and he's sliding down the banister while shooting. He's getting covered in...
Like he's doing the thing where like he points one gun out further than the other gun.
Yeah. He's like, it's very Max Payne for sure. Or maybe Max Payne is very hard boiled. But
Max Payne is just John Woo.
Which one of them shoots the flower so he gets covered in the flower? Does Jun shoot it?
Yeah, Jun shoots the flower. And then Chow Yun-fat jumps through it.
He jumps through the flower. He's covered in flour, and then he finally catches the guy.
He like slides up right next to him.
Yeah, right next to him, puts his gun up to his head, and then just extrajudicially just fucking murders him.
Yeah, and they kind of needed that guy too. Like it's brought him immediately. Like
immediately, his boss is like, "Why did you kill that guy?"
Yeah,
and that guy had just killed his friend, so he's like, I don't have to be a cop by the rules. But it's pretty funny because he gets in trouble for it, but he only gets yelled at, so he doesn't get in like that much trouble.
He only gets chewed out. Like
he has a lot of freedom within the police department for sure.
It's like you'll be court-martialed.
Yeah, exactly. Nah, I'll get chewed out. I've been chewed out before. Yeah, no, he gets chewed out for shooting. Yeah,
a prime suspect.
Yeah,
like a lead.
Kunimura-san. Yeah, I don't know. That part is actually probably the funniest part of the movie.
I think it's funny that you mentioned his boss.
His boss is such a D-bag. He's like, they just gave him like the most annoying personality. It's like he's such an inconvenience to these hero cops that they have to like follow the rules.
So Philip Chan is the guy who plays him, Superintendent Pang. So I think it's funny that you call him a D-bag because kind of, but also
it's just his attitude. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
nothing he says is wrong.
Yeah.
Because everything he tells them to do is like they're being unreasonable, but they just give him this like repugnant attitude.
Remember, the reason he's giving the gun smuggling case that Chow Yun-fat is running like such a hard time is because they're gonna blow Alan's cover. That's the whole thing. Right. That's why he keeps because a plot point in the movie, which is also the subtle love triangle that goes on between Teresa, the female inspector, and also Chow Yun-fat's girlfriend. Yeah. Who was apparently supposed to be played by Michelle Yeoh, which would have been
so epic.
This movie would have been completely different.
This movie would have been insane. But also, like, not only does she not have like any action sequences in the movie, but there's no martial arts in this movie. So Michelle Yeoh just shooting a gun, I don't know, maybe that would still be cool. I'm sure she could do cool choreography with it, but like, as the role is now, it would have been wasted on Michelle Yeoh.
So Teresa Mo is her name. She plays
Michelle
Teresa.
Yeoh would have been wasted on. Yeah.
Sorry, Teresa Mo is the woman, and she plays Teresa Chang. Go figure,
okay.
Teresa. And
she's just got an incredible range.
And so she receives white roses from Tony Leung's character,
right?
And
the flowers mean something, right?
Yes. So the message is that she gets in the flowers. In the cards, there's song lyrics, and
she sings them at some point.
Yeah, because the song lyrics, the way the notes, how they work, like on a do re mi fa sol la li do scale, it's a numerical code essentially of like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 or whatever. And the songs that she gets is "Hello" by Lionel Richie, and then "Mona Lisa," which was written by Ray Evans and Jay Livingston, but most famously performed by Nat King Cole. That's like a 50s pop song, but it's kind of like that setup for like the love triangle that you see in the elevator scene between Tony, Teresa, and Chow Yun-fat's character, where he's flirting with her a little bit. She's interested in him because she saw him carrying the white roses, and they kind of are pen pals.
Right.
Yeah.
They do. They have some
kind of rapport.
Yeah.
But the messages that she decodes, she sends to the superintendent, where he punches in the number to decode the message further.
Right.
And every message that he gets is kind of like, hey, you got to tell Chow Fat to back off because like the heat is too much. Like he's gonna blow my cover.
Yeah. Well, I really like though Chow Yun Fat while they're in the elevator says she doesn't like white roses actually, and then she's like, oh, I do actually.
And yeah. Because there's chemistry going on.
There's a lot going on. And like honestly, they have like Chow Yun Fat and Tony Leung have really good chemistry too.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, it's not even that like they don't get along or anything, or they're both, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of like a Mega Man X and Zero kind of relationship where they're like two sides of the same path of justice or whatever.
Right.
Like God, what
it's what I think it's interesting though is that the person who like the personality of the person who is gets to be a cop all the time is far more cavalier than the personality of the person who's living a double life. And I think double lives are really cool. I mean, there's a reason why Miami Vice is entertaining as it is. It's like watching people kind of like pretend and like there's a satisfying element to watching people constantly switching roles. Right. And I really, really like the relationship because Tony Leung has like a boss and then he has like kind of a new guy who like wants to work with him.
Yes.
And so he kind of has like two bosses throughout the movie, and his relationship with those two guys is like really pretty cool actually. Like his older boss seems to like really admire and respect him. And then when he has to betray him to like keep up the ruse of staying undercover, he feels terrible about it, and he has to like execute him and all of the guys that he had been working with before to like maintain his status as being undercover.
Right. So Tony Leung's character Alan, just Alan,
which by the way I believe is a reference to Alain Delon,
really,
who's the French actor who was in a kind of similar movie called Le Samurai. Yeah, where
I guess. Yeah, now that you mention it, it kind of is kind of a similar.
I don't think it's. Here's the thing.
Not super.
I think it's just the character is similar.
Yeah, more of just like I feel like you kind of just transplanted like the characteristics and attitudes of the character and brought it into this kind of setting.
Yeah, he's a loner, right?
Yeah. So Tony Leung's character lives on a boat. He's a deep cover with the triads, and he works for this guy named Uncle Hoi, who is played by Kwon Hoi-san. And he is like the nice triad boss. Like everyone calls him.
He's Uncle. The honorable guy.
Yeah, he treats everyone like family type deal. Like literally, you're seeing him peel apples for his lieutenants to eat, like a grandfather or something like that.
But he lives on this like palatial estate, and they have like this conversation in like this beautiful space.
Right.
And Tony Leung is like very racked by the guilt that he carries with him, so he makes these paper cranes after like every person that he kills,
which is like. That's just loaded for one.
Yeah.
Also, because like
supposedly it's based on John Woo's daughter making paper cranes on the set of another one of his movies.
Really?
Yeah.
So I thought what I interpreted it as is just like so paper cranes itself. There's a lot of meanings that go along with it, but when you make paper cranes, one of the things is like you're kind of wishing for a new life almost. Like every time you make a crane, that's one more thing you're dedicating to like that wish coming true. So it's like, which kind of makes sense thematically because. Tony Leung doesn't want to do this anymore.
He doesn't seem.
He just wants to get out.
Yeah.
And Chow Yun Fat, who's like the cowboy essentially, wants to be a cop.
Yeah.
Like
This is his purpose.
Like there's an interesting
mowing down like triads is like his calling.
Is his calling essentially. And they have several interesting philosophical conversations where there's a clear difference in how they see policing and their dedication to like it as a whole.
Right.
Like Tony Leung at one point yells at Chow Yun Fat. He's like, this isn't your case. Get out of here. And then Chow Yun Fat's like, it doesn't matter. I'm a cop. So long as there's a decent cop left in Hong Kong, I'm gonna do my job. Which is very interesting. It's and Tony Leung tells him his dream is to go sailing to Antarctica.
Yeah. Anywhere away from here.
Yeah. And that's like. Kind of haunting in a sense. It's almost like he just desperately wants to be gone. This is destroying him. And there's lines that he says where he's like, I don't know who is really me anymore. Like me, like him doing the stuff for the triads, is that the real him? The lines are starting to blur so much for him, and you really feel for him for a lot.
And his old boss, is kind of like a Yeah, he's got this uncle-like persona. He's like sweet and kind of amiable.
He's really kind.
Yeah,
and he wants Alan to do it.
Yeah.
And he's like,
yeah, when he's being betrayed, he's like, I won't be killed by an animal like this.
Right.
Like, you have to be the one to do it. This is in reference to Anthony Wong's character.
Right.
I can't remember Anthony Wong's character's name.
Johnny Wong.
Johnny
Wong.
But anyways, but Anthony Wong, he's in the Infernal Affairs movies. I think he's really amazing in this. He has like a very sinister vibe, and he's like, you know, he has that kind of half-oo kind of look where he's like half Cantonese, half English, and he has like the kind of like the bastard child of like China and England kind of look to him. This is very, very perfect for this movie. Very perfect for Hong Kong vibes.
The living memory of like Opium War.
Yeah, but like not just that, but like also just like this is one of the, you know, we're just a couple years out from 1997.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're just a couple years out from like Hong Kong like changing forever. He's like an image of like what that Hong Kong was,
like,
right? Yeah.
Or like colonial Britain and stuff like that.
Exactly. Like British Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But I think he just has an amazing atmosphere, and he's so ambitious. He's growing the arms trade that they're engaged in beyond just selling to like local gangsters into something where they're selling
like South America.
Yeah, they're like selling to like military groups and other
groups in South America.
Exactly.
I think the implication is they're selling it to Contra.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
it's just like, wow, this got really political.
No, it's really cool though, and yeah, they're expanding into like full on like military level of distribution for weapons.
It's really interesting because like, you know, Tony Leung's character is talking to,
and that's a big part of the Cold War too, you know, right? So
but Tony Leung's character is talking to Uncle Hoy, and then Uncle Hoy is like, I don't trust this guy.
Yeah.
And then immediately gets like betrayed by Anthony Wong's character.
Well, but isn't there like a thing? So like Anthony Wong's character was working with the guy that he kills in the library though too,
yes.
Right? So Tony Leung's character is a really cold scene where he's like driving around his Ferrari or whatever. He pulls up.
As hell.
Yeah, exactly. He walks into a library. Library is beautiful and brightly lit. He's like thumbing through a bunch of books. He pulls out a book, and in the book is a gun. He sits down with this guy that they need to talk about some kind of business. He opens the gun and like blows the guy's brains out in the middle of the library.
Yep.
And then he puts the book back with the gun and walks out.
I think it's so cool, and that's pretty too, because
cold,
there's a perfect outline of the book on the table. I'm like, oh wow, that's just so.
Yeah, they weren't really hiding it, you know.
Yeah, they weren't.
But it's cool. It's a good scene. It's like well shot. But yeah, so I think Anthony Wong, part of why he wants to work with him is because they've executed the guy that he was working with.
Yes.
And I don't remember why.
So the guy that Tony Leung executed was actually working for Uncle Hoy at first.
Oh, really?
He betrayed Uncle Hoy and started working for Anthony Wong.
And so Anthony Wong's trying to get him to betray Uncle Hoy. Okay,
yeah.
I get it.
It's essentially just a power play because Uncle Hoy is the oldest gang leader essentially, and they need him out of the way for the new guys to take over his territory essentially, and take over his trade. Mm-hmm. And throughout all of this, Chow Yun-fat's character is intersecting occasionally into like that whole like gun running.
Well, and he like so it was Anthony Wong's team, like Johnny's crew that were involved at the tea house shootout.
Yes.
So you know, Chow Yun-fat like blames him personally for the death of his friend, the other cop.
What is his name? Benny Mack, played by Bowie Lam.
And Benny goes out in a really brutal way. Jun Kunimura, by the way, is like literally the coldest motherfucker in this movie, despite the fact he has no lines. He jumps out holding a civilian and lets Benny like mow down the civilian, pushes the civilian out of the way, and then mows down Benny.
When I watched that, I'm like, dang, this is some Alex Murphy type shit.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, is he gonna be turned into RoboCop?
Yeah, exactly. It's brutal though.
I think we're missing one person in particular who was actually one of my favorite characters in the entire movie. Mad Dog, who's played by Philip Kwok. I don't know if he's the big muscle guy that works for
he's the one-eyed guy, right?
Yeah, Anthony Wong is like muscle, the super thug essentially.
Yeah, he's kind of like he's the
he like
he's
one
the Goro.
hand chokes Tony Leung and then like holds the gun like his. It's crazy how strong he is.
Yeah. He's definitely meant to be like the ultimate heavy in this movie. I think ultimate heavy characters like that, where you give him sunglasses and give him a leather jacket, sometimes are like a little too much. But he's still pretty cool.
He's still got some character complexity.
He does actually.
Because when towards the end, when they're in the hospital and Anthony Wong shows up and mows down a bunch of bystanders, he stands up and he goes, "Why did you do that? They were just innocent people." And then he tries to shoot Anthony Wong, but runs out of bullets and then gets killed.
Yeah.
So like
he does have some interesting principles.
Right. And like he discarded his
Showing
gun.
that there are principled people within these organizations
Right.
seems to be the intention for that character.
Right. And which is fairly interesting because right before that, he's fighting Tony Leung and they're having a shootout. But since there's bystanders, they decide to both disarm themselves and continue hand to hand. And they both give the bystanders an opportunity to escape.
Yeah.
But the moment they do is when Anthony Wong's character shows up and just starts shooting them all up. Which
He's so good. I like him a lot.
he's just a
really good.
straight villain.
Yeah, he really is.
He's just like, okay.
But isn't gun running like the perfect topic for a movie like this?
Yeah.
Because there's just like
then also he just decides we'll just blow up the hospital.
it's just ample weapons everywhere. Everyone just has weapons upon weapons.
So I think this is an interesting point to bring up, like kind of the pacing of the film, because I feel like it's kind of breakneck for the first hour, and then the second half of the film. So the movie's about 2 hours. The first hour of the movie is you're kind of getting the setup for everything going on.
I think this movie in general comes its pants a little bit early.
Yeah, a bit.
A little bit.
But I don't think the second half, like that second hour, needs to be as long as it was. Like there's a lot of meandering that goes on in the underground hospital area.
But also the hospital's the worst set piece.
I don't necessarily agree. I think it's an interesting set piece, but of what we use in the hospital, it's pretty boring. I think
there's good things though too. I mean, having the baby is cool. It's iconic enough that they put it on the poster.
Right.
But that being said, I just don't think it's like, I think the set pieces basically decrease in excitement and in quality. Tea house being the most exciting, the warehouse shipping place being the next most exciting, because at least that one has like
and then the underground bunker, which is kind of, there's only one, in my opinion, one really, really cool or iconic scene that comes from the underground bunker, and that's when they empty out the bullets for the gunpowder, stick it in the little pipe, and then Chow Yun-fat shoves a bullet into the hole of the pipe, and then he just walks over and he shoots it essentially. But like he does that whole thing where he aims and like he has the tension and then he drops it and then he just does it like really quick so that way it's more natural or whatever and hits it dead on. That is the way it's shot and the way I think the lens, the curvature of the lens makes it seem like there's a slight warpage that goes on, so you see more of the room. And I don't know how really to explain it, but it's just it's a very, very compelling shot composition that goes on where. But other than that,
well, and there's a big explosion too, which according to Chow Yun-fat, they had to shoot it twice, and the first time, the first time he was convinced that the director was convinced that the explosion was too far behind him. So then he took over control of the explosion and then sets it off like way, way too early and like just, I guess, scared the shit out of Chow Yun-fat, which is hilarious and probably horribly dangerous. That's a recurring theme.
Probably more horribly dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. but I guess Chow Yun-fat was professional enough that at the end he asked, if that was
if it was a good shot.
Yeah, was it a good shot at least? Yeah.
But yeah, and then like we're just kind of running around hospital hallways for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And it only really gets interesting once the shooting starts. And it kind of meanders for a little bit before the shooting starts. And that's really the only detriment to it. I mean, I get you got to get all the players there and everyone up to pace and what's going on.
And to be fair, that's also where they start establishing Tony Leung and Chow Yun-fat's like shared character dynamic,
right?
Because for most of the movie, especially the two main set pieces from before, like the tea house and the everything up through the smuggling, scene is them separate. They're like basically two separate stories within it.
Like they barely interact at all.
I guess so. Chow Yun-fat confronts Anthony Wong's character out front of a restaurant.
Yeah,
and he's like, "You killed my friend. I'm gonna fucking get you." And then Tony Leung like smacks him over the head with a gun to maintain his cover or whatever. And they have an interaction there, but being on the same tide really only is part of the hospital sequence.
Right. And I would say they work really well as a team. And there's this whole part where Chow Yun-fat watches Tony Leung do his work, and then he sees like Benny Mac, like his old partner that died, like in Tony Leung's character, and I think that kind of solidifies like, oh, they're partners now.
Yeah. There's a buddy cop element to this movie.
There's a huge buddy cop element.
But I will say though that because the movie is so much more interested in the set pieces and in like the big explosions, the shootouts and all that stuff, there aren't nearly as many sequences of just bonding.
Right.
You know, like a Lethal Weapon movie, like
What little bonding we do see does feel significant, though. It's not surface level, like, oh, he likes this or you like that. It's more of a, I feel like
coming to an understanding.
yeah, philosophical bonding almost. Because
But like, think about how much of the runtime of like a Lethal Weapon movie is like sequences
just dedicated to
just bonding and
Right.
spending time together and joking and laughing. Like there are action
Yeah.
sequences, you know, they do rip a house off of the side of a cliff, but there's also parts where one of them's stuck on a toilet and the other one has to just like be there and so the toilet doesn't explode.
I think part of that though is like Lethal Weapon is definitely more interested in exploring their relationship.
Totally. And this movie is an action movie.
Isn't really that much. And like it's called Hard Boiled. And at one point Anthony Wong's like, oh, you're the hard boiled cop. Or he said the line.
I know, but there's also another thing that's really funny is in the early part of the movie, Chow Yun-fat is talking to another one of his cops, basically because their friend Benny has died, and he's like, you weren't like this when we were in the academy together. You were really soft back then, but you've become really hard now.
Yeah. You become hard boiled.
Yeah, you've become hard. And I thought that was kind of
It's it's like that one Family Guy joke. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Oh, he said that. That's why it's called that or
Yeah.
whatever. But I love the whole hospital.
you
action
like the
scene.
hospital stuff.
Yeah. Because like essentially the last 40 minutes of the film is one continuous action sequence.
Yeah.
It's like non-stop action.
Yeah.
It's just
The movie's kind of nonstop action. There is a little slowdown there to reestablish who the teams are, show that these two are on the same team, you know, like play out the love triangle stuff a little bit in the elevator. But for the most part, like it's a pretty action-packed movie. I mean, they spent 40 days shooting
in the hospital.
shooting the hospital sequence. Just the action shots. I mean, like one of the reasons why I think Hong Kong action movies are so exciting and so fun to watch is because just the painstaking level of detail and perfection, at least on execution, that it comes to every little thing. You know, like, you know, Jackie Chan might shoot 20 takes to 60 takes of him just throwing a fan up in the air and then grabbing it and like spinning around. But there's just no way a Hollywood movie is ever going to allow you to use that much of other people's time for such tiny little details. And that's why there's a noticeable difference in the quality of the action sequences.
Sam Raimi or Edgar Wright.
So maybe somebody would, but especially if the
But I feel
studios
like
involved.
no, I agree. It's definitely so much more rare to. I feel like.
Well, and like I love the Rush Hour movies, but you can't compare the action sequences in the Rush Hour movies to like the Golden Harvest action sequences from Jackie Chan's other stuff.
Right.
And this movie does feel like a painstaking amount of detail was put into the choreography, which is all gun choreography. There's like no martial arts in this movie. It's not really a martial arts movie. It's like
and what little we have
a gun
of like
ballet.
non-gun fighting or whatever, it's more of just like a brawl, and it's very it's very unmartial artsy. That's the best way I can put it. There's like a whole lot of choreography with it. It's more of just like a throw out big punches, big hits type of deal.
Yeah.
They're unrefined fighters.
Right.
And I think just kind of just adds to the rawness of it all, because these aren't martial artists; they're just cops.
They're cops. They're cops and robbers.
Yeah, it's literally just cops and robbers. I don't know. Other than I can't really think of much else. Were there any points that stood out that you weren't really too big a fan of?
Yeah, I do think the pacing is not perfect. I noticed myself starting to tune out, like heading into the last set piece. But I do think that, like, you know, what's there is like super memorable. I love all the shots of him just fishing. I love all the shots of Tony Leung on his boat. There's lots of these beautiful images of the ocean and just beautiful images of like Tony Leung just like driving through Hong Kong.
A very interesting point you make, that like, so Tony Leung's character, who's so desperate to be free, and both he and Chow Yun-fat are constantly like,
they find their freedom in the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. Chow Yun-fat fishes, where Tony Leung lives on the sea in a boat, and then he leaves on the boat. Essentially, where he just goes to experience his freedom. Where Chow Yun-fat is stuck on the land and only wishes to experience like portions of freedom or whatever. It's a very interesting dichotomy that adds to the two characters. But yeah, I definitely think like your whole point of like the pacing being a little bit weird, and like kind of that little middle 2/3, like 3/4 of the way through, like kind of like Yeah, it doesn't need to be maybe like a whole hour we spend in the hospital. I think, cutting like 10 minutes would have been fine. I
Yeah.
also think towards my big thing is the big standoff towards the end where Tony Leung is held captive by Anthony Wong and
Mm,
Chow Yun Fat is like pretty much like has to like come up and try to save him.
mm.
Do the whole thing where like the bullet that he had set up in the underground bunker scene with Anthony Wong's eye. And the entire time I'm thinking, oh, he's just gonna shoot him in the eye. Tony Leung's gonna be fine. But then Tony Leung gets himself shot in the gut for some reason.
Mhm.
I thought it was just an extra contrived kind of contrivedness, I guess.
I like it. I think that like, you know, whenever people get injured in big sequences, I always think that adds like a little bit more realism to them. It adds a little bit more weight to what happens. If it's weird, it's weird. But
I think it's so funny that you mentioned that. I think an interesting part is everyone gets injured except for like Chow Yun Fat, except once. He gets shot once, and that's it. Like Tony Leung gets like glass in his face. He gets shot up all over the place.
Those little details, they add an element of danger to like everything that's going on because you're seeing them have like an effect and impact on the characters. And so those little bits where like somebody, like they have to wrap up their hand for the rest of the movie, or like they're, those little things, they just add up. They really matter. I really, and it's like, it's just interesting little details like that. Like, I think they, like for instance, like one of the cool things about the movie Die Hard, is that he doesn't have shoes, right?
Right.
Those little things like raise the stakes. They create like a feeling of vulnerability to the audience.
I don't disagree, but within Hard Boiled, it almost seems like that vulnerability doesn't exist with Chow Yun Fat's character. It exists with everyone else, except for Chow Yun Fat. And Chow Yun Fat gets shot in the film while carrying the baby and stuff like that. But that bullet wound does not affect him for the rest of the film. Like he's still carrying that baby, and in the arm that he got shot, he like rips out the power line or whatever to swing out of the hospital.
Yeah.
I thought you were shot in that arm. Isn't that going to be like insanely painful or whatever? But
Not
no.
him.
Not him.
And I also think the movie ends very abruptly too.
Yes.
It ends really abruptly, and then like the happy music comes in, but nothing happy happens.
Right. And it's the same music that we've been hearing throughout the film, but that music was not used in sections where like the emotional weight or like the drama was like super super heavy or anything. It was used in like lighter moments.
Right.
And in this moment in particular, the ending song that they decide to end on is even more funky than usual. It's
it's like a really funky take on the upbeat music from earlier in the movie.
It's got a bass slap bass solo and stuff like that, and it's just Tony Leung sailing off into the distance. And you're like kind of left somber throughout, like, or not somber maybe, but you're feeling it, like the emotions of it all. And then all of a sudden this essentially Seinfeld riff comes out of nowhere. And just throws.
And that's the thing. I actually really like the music in this movie, but I feel like they needed at least one more piece of like a different tone for the end. Yeah. They needed a different song for the end.
Which I think is so funny because John Woo is so into jazz or whatever.
A jazz part would have been better.
Yeah.
Like a down-tempo jazz would have been better.
Yeah. And it seemed like that's what it was setting up to be, because like Chow Yun Fat's character is also like
he's a jazz clarinetist. Yeah.
But he's not playing anything like he's playing like cool jazz, if not like, like blues inspired, if anything.
Yeah.
So, but then like it ends with a funk line.
Yeah, it's really weird. But otherwise, I think again the movie's fun as hell, and there's a reason why it's like a cult favorite, and why why he was so well received over here, and why he got to like have like a big career directing Hollywood films.
There's a super famous. This going back to the hospital. There's a super famous scene where it's a long take where they shoot up a bunch of guys, Tony Leung and Chow Yun Fat, in the hallway, and then they enter an elevator, and then they exit the elevator. They never actually went up or down in the elevator. They just closed the elevator doors, and everyone outside of the elevator doors redressed the set to make it look like a different floor. And they just reopened the elevator doors and came out and kept shooting that take. And I think that's so crazy. It's so well done too.
Yeah, that is cool.
And you don't really tell. You can't tell at all. It's so seamless.
Yeah, that is cool. No, that's awesome.
Uh,
And in general, I mean, like the coverage is like incredible in this movie.
Yeah.
Like the coverage is incredible. The editing is fantastic. There's just lots of it's really creative and just like little edits where it didn't have to be. The sequence where they first come face to face, there's freeze frames on both of their faces, despite like the audio doesn't change or drop out. It's just freeze frames.
And there's like John Woo-isms. I'm gonna just call it that. Just John Woo-isms like everywhere. Like the slow-mo,
The birds.
Yeah, all that stuff, which, you know, it's a John Wooism, but I feel like in this movie it's so much more palatable. It's executed well. The Chow Yun-fat's doing his slow-mo rolling or slow-mo shooting. It feels impactful. It feels important. And despite all the chaos that you see and like the just the sheer carnage that goes on the screen and the property destruction, I don't ever feel lost necessarily.
That's actually one thing that's incredible about it is that in Michael Bay movies, when there's a tremendous amount of, and some of this just has to do with CG because they'll CG so many different sequences that honestly, they don't even.
In my opinion, I feel like we can blame the Bourne Identity for a lot of this. And like its sequels and how it influenced like how action scenes and fight choreography are shot, especially like the geography of a fight scene and stuff like that.
No, the geography doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up.
Yeah.
This movie never loses track of geography. Like this movie knows exactly where the characters are in each place and like where they're moving to. I
never lost track.
No,
I knew.
You're never losing. Yeah.
Right.
And like one thing that'll happen in a Michael Bay movie or something like that is a character will turn around and then the world on the other side of them is completely different than the world from the other side of them. They'll be like looking at the pyramids of Giza and they'll turn around and they'll be in the middle of a city.
Right.
And like that kind of confusion, that kind of delirium is not happening in these kinds of movies whatsoever. And there's a certain level of satisfaction in it. I will say that there's a special like quality that the movie has that makes it as rewatchable as this one is.
There's a huge dedication to filmic continuity.
Yeah.
Like this entire film is like a continuity film essentially. There's like not a single, I can't think of a single moment where there's a break in continuity. And
there probably is too if we like look them up, but like I certainly can't notice them. And I notice that kind of stuff all the time.
Right.
So
it's that good.
Yeah.
There's also one other line that I really liked in particular. It's said by Superintendent Pang.
What does he say?
He says, "Give a guy a gun, he thinks he's Superman.
Give him two and he thinks he's God."
Just like, yeah.
And like 5 minutes earlier, Chow Yun-fat is sliding down the banister of you're just shooting two guns. It's like doosh, 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 doosh.
You know what was so funny when I was watching this film? Part of me kept thinking of Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
And Nicholas Frost's character, like he would like, I don't know if they talk about Hard Boiled at all. I think they just talk about Bad Boys and Point Break. But this is a Nick Frost like.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of badass that he like, wants to be in that movie is like from this movie. Yeah, definitely. No, like it's really. I mean, it's got a great spirit and energy though to it too. And I really think like the first two set pieces are amazing. The first one's like just iconic, it's so damn good. Like the cuts to the birds screaming and then the shooting. And John Kunimura is just like the coldest motherfucker of all time. Feels so realistic and cool.
So like it's so tense.
Yeah.
And the shot composition and the blocking and everything. Yeah. It's like, oh my God. It's so. And when Chow Yun-fat,
I like the intimacy of it too.
Yeah, he turns his bird cage, which has like a little mirror, so he can see the table where the deal is going down, and then he notices June like sitting alone at the table behind them, that's eyeing their table as well. So he's like, okay, maybe I should pay attention to this guy more, because like this guy is like something's gonna happen, or whatever. It's a lot of visual language. The dialogue is not necessarily contributing to the tension all that much. A lot of it is just facial expression and then like body language and stuff like that.
Right.
Like you could see the beads of sweat coming off of these dudes. It feels like it's a hot ass cafe in there. And
no, it's like you can feel the humidity of like the Hong Kong night in this room. It's intense. It feels so good.
And it feels like a breathable, like, you know how Burst City feels like a breathable, like kind of atmosphere and stuff like that, like a lived in world and shit.
Yeah, this one does it too, for sure.
There's a weird sequence though. This goes back to Teresa where she's in the hospital. This is part of the meandering that I was kind of, where like for 5 minutes, she kind of just stares at a room full of babies. And I don't know what that whole thing is. She's the only female character in this movie, too.
Yeah, this movie's not passing any Bechdel tests.
She's interested in babies.
Yeah, she's interested in babies and the two boys.
And that's really it.
Those boys are cute.
But, you know, other than that, I think this movie is...
And she's cute. I mean, like, I like when she sings the songs from the cars and whatever. She's charming, but the movie doesn't give her much to do.
Right.
Gives her pretty much less than nothing to do.
Yeah.
This movie is about the boys and how they are shooting. The boys are shooting.
The boys are shooting their guns.
Yeah, they're shooting their guns at other boys.
They're infinite bullets.
Yeah, they get infinite bullets to
they
shoot
got
the other boys.
infinite bullet headband.
Yeah, exactly. Infinite ammo.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like this is probably one of the more well-known films that we've talked about so far.
Probably.
I think a lot of people will consider this like a action classic.
No, 100% of the genre. Anybody who likes this genre, I think, knows this movie. Especially anybody who likes Hong Kong movies.
Right.
This is like the most well-known. But it's also, I think, there's so many reasons for why it's as good as it is, and there's reasons for why I haven't actually dug past it into like the rest of his movies, is because it's so I like
Hard Boiled is almost like kind of a perfect kind of piece in isolation.
Yeah.
Because there's I'm trying to think of what else. Oh, John Woo's A Better Tomorrow. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's like also a triad crime kind of movie type deal. I think you would find the sequel kind of funny because they do Beer Fest before Beer Fest.
Really?
Because in A Better Tomorrow, spoilers for a movie that came out, I think,
like 30 plus years ago.
30, 40 years ago, I guess. Chow Yun-Fat's character dies in the first
and he has a twin.
He has a twin.
And he's like, just don't worry, call me his name, and just pretend I've had all of his experiences, and like I have a great established relationship with all of you already. And they're like, yes, we will.
So
lock on Stratos.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, they just Beer Fest.
And Heffernan's character from Beer Fest.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the weirdest tropes ever, and now I want to put it in something. It's such a bad trope, but people be doing it.
So funny
it's
though.
A bad
it's
trope.
So funny.
So one of the worst tropes.
But I think you'd like A Better Tomorrow. Like you like Yakuza movies.
Here's the thing: I know I would like the other ones, and that's part of why I feel as guilty as I do about having not seen it. You know, because like I'm not actually a person who usually gets stuck on a single piece of media without experiencing the other stuff around it. I usually get curious. I start digging around, and in this particular example, I haven't. So I feel kind of bad about that. But
so me personally, I actually come at it from a different angle. I am not too huge a fan of the heroic bloodshed type movies. I think like, you know, violence with guns is cool and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know what it is. It's just like it feels. There's nothing wrong with it, but I don't know, something preferable about me seeing like, you know, knuckle hit face or whatever, or like
I've definitely watched way more of the kung fu kind of Golden Harvest stuff than I have of these, and I'm sure part of that is because of my natural inclination.
Right. My stuff is like. You know, again, Golden Harvest, just like you said, it's like Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, and I think some of Jet Li's stuff too. And then like Shaw Productions or Shaw Brothers Productions. And that's like essentially like the Five Venoms troupe and stuff like that. Gordan Lo, who is that's Santat and like the 36 Chambers and stuff like that. Where I don't know, maybe it's just like the fact that the heroic bloodshed genre was kind of more of an evolution of the martial arts genre to an extent, where they replaced fists and like hand-to-hand weapons
with
squibs and firearms, essentially. Because like I wouldn't say the level of violence is all that different necessarily than like say a wuxia film.
Well, just certainly not in like how much screen time is dedicated to them. Like the skeleton's the same, just the spectacle has been replaced.
And I think part of it also,
but they're not as funny.
Yeah. Also, I think part of it has to do with like, you know, changes in, you know, cinema landscape, but also the evolution of cinema technology. It's like all of a sudden we can do a lot more violent things on film for a lot cheaper and a lot easier and a lot more realistically.
I'm sure that the bloodbath movies are like, I'm sure that the boom in them had to do with the democratization of, you know,
and I
think fake bullets and squibs, right? Yeah.
And I think an interesting point that that you made was like, you had a bunch of these like heroic bloodshed movies coming out of Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s, and all of a sudden, or the early 80s, late 80s,
late 80s, early 90s, right?
Yeah. And then we apparently essentially like a lot of the US studios poach a lot of these directors or choreographers and stuff like that for movies like in the States, for the action movies here.
Right. No, it does seem like it's very interesting that this period directly predates pretty similar kinds of movies from the 90s in Hollywood.
But just
like
with
the
like
80s Hong Kong seems like a very, very influential to what 90s Hollywood
where
is
I
like.
would argue that 80s Hong Kong, I can argue more of a auteur aspect of it. Like that when it translates over to the Western cinema, it feels like it's got that studio kind of sheen on it.
Definitely by the late 90s, but I still feel like movies like Lethal Weapon and Die Hard are pretty unique, interesting kinds of movies.
Also, remember, Die Hard is a remake.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a remake of a sequel to a Frank Sinatra movie.
Okay, I buy that.
Okay. It's also, they're both based off a book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't disagree. I think it's like that.
Well, especially, and here's the thing: both those movies have sequels that get very silly.
Right.
Like increasingly, like Joe Pesci in the Lethal Weapon movies is like very silly. But the first two, especially the first Lethal Weapon's really sad and really dark.
Right.
Like that, like Mel Gibson's character is very dark in the first one.
He's a man that's like suffering from suicidal tendencies because his wife died because of his job.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God.
And he doesn't come out of it in the entire movie.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's not fixed like ever. He never.
He gets increasingly better as the movies progress. But like the movies start to get silly. He starts to get silly. But he's never better in that movie.
Right. But I wouldn't even argue like he gets better at all. It's just like the world takes it less seriously.
Maybe, yeah. The movie's like, you need to get over that, bud. That was 3 movies ago.
Come on, man. What is this mental health nonsense that you're still dealing with?
But no, he gets silly. I mean, like, there's scenes where, like, he's, like, doing stuff where he's like, yeah, he gets, like, really squirrely about it, you know? And I love that movie. I think it's, like, literally one of, like, the best, like, Hollywood scripts ever written. Big fan of Shane Black who wrote that. But, you know, like, Die Hard's also really unique.
Yeah, no. I don't disagree.
But it does feel influenced by these movies.
Right. I feel like what it is the grounding of the Hollywood action hero. Like, all of a sudden, you can harm them. Chow Yun-fat is more indestructible, but, like, Tony Leung is very much destructible.
Right.
Versus, like, you know, before that we had Stallone and Schwarzenegger. These like macho like guys are essentially indestructible, kind of like, you know, bulletproof kind of dudes. Like Rambo doesn't really take that much damage. We don't see the extent of Rambo's pain that he experienced until the sequels.
Yeah. And Hollywood does start to do interesting things with that stuff in the 90s. Even, you know, like in De Palma's like Mission Impossible, like the fact that he has a bead of sweat that becomes an obstacle is an interesting thing. Like Hollywood movies would not normally think about that a character's under so much stress that they may be sweating, and then the sweat, you know what I mean? Like those little interesting little details.
It feels like a shift from like a fantastical or
so something hardened and realistic.
Yeah, or more from fantasy to grounded.
Yeah.
Or just like slowly going towards a more grounded aspect. And like film one.
You could even argue that like Nolan's stuff is like taking that to like the far extreme. Right. Where now Batman can't even drive a Batmobile anymore. It has to be a repurposed tank.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like so realistic that it's no longer fantasy
like
at all.
He uses cell phones to like ping like sound or whatever to create a 3-dimensional.
He's the ultimate detective.
I get it's just so like taking fantasy and grounding it to such an extent. But for this, I think it's like, you know, for that, I think it's an extreme example. Like you have an extreme fantasy, which is like comic books, and then you're trying to ground it in reality. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to make sure I'm still on camera for this. Whereas in this case, you don't have something that's so far fantastical as
we're talking about people who sell stuff.
Right.
These are transactional people.
Yeah.
You know, they're merchants of death.
But I mean, would you recommend this movie?
Oh, 100%. And nobody needs my approval to see this movie because it's so ubiquitous.
I think everyone who is like even tangentially curious about Hong Kong action has either heard of this or maybe seen it. I think
it's a really good starting point too if you're interested.
Just trying to dip your toes. Because I think there's also a lot of sensibilities of American filmmaking in there.
Yeah.
or at least like, you know, especially coming from a contemporary film audience, you're gonna recognize a lot of the stuff that is used visually and cinematically, like in the language that, and it's gonna be very present in Hard Boiled.
Yeah, but it's like a beautiful time capsule to the time and place that it's from. It's like full of people who are really famous and then like a million other things.
Like Michael Bay, Eat Your Heart Out.
Yeah,
like they blow up a hospital.
Yeah, but it's great. Love it. What are we talking about next week?
Good question. I don't think we decided.
Okay, I think I decided.
What did you decide?
I think we're talking about Old Boy.
All right. You want to do the Old Boy double feature?
Yeah, we do.
All right. So next week we're actually. Are you?
Well, we'll shoot. We'll shoot it when we can. But next time we're meeting, we're talking about
Old Boy double feature. Not Spike Lee's Old Boy, but original Old Boy.
Park Chan-wook and the Indian one, right?
I think it's Indian.
Yeah, I think it's from India. Jingin, I think it's called.
Yeah, something like that. Mm-hmm. But Old Boy double feature.
Yeah. Recently, Old Boy just got a remaster, which is in theaters here in Los Angeles. I don't know if it's in theaters wherever you may be, but I saw it. It was fantastic. It was awesome. I think I one time saw it at the Main Art in Royal Oak in Detroit, so it's my second time seeing it in theaters, I believe. But I love that movie so much, and yeah, we'll be talking about Old Boy. I have so many things to say.
All right. So we'll see you next time.
Yep. Bye-bye.